and welcome. So today let's talk about nebulizing rats, because I've been seeing a lot of discourse on it online recently, and naturally I have an opinion because that's who I am as a person, but let's talk about it. So first of all, nebulizing, what is that? It is basically where you take your rat and you put them in some kind of container, or if you have a very chill rat, you can hold them, I'll get to that later, and you use a nebulizer, which is a machine that turns liquid into steam to help break down any congestion or mucus they may have in their nose or lungs. So there is discourse on it because of how stressful this can be for rats. Basically, like, is it a treatment that's worthwhile, essentially? And I just wanted to talk about it. So, I feel like it's becoming more popular. My cat is behind you, which is what I'm staring at, and she is flipping out. She is rolling around and just pawing at everything. She is so stupid. Hi! She's a demon. I love her, but she's a demon. I feel like in the rodent community it became more popular because people were seeing people do this with their guinea pigs pretty frequently. And a lot of time things that work for one rodent, people wonder if they'll work for another rodent. So yeah, let's just talk about it. So nebulizer, I do have a nebulizer personally. I used it for Warren and Hex, who were both very ill with respiratory issues, and I just used saline with them. Now you can make your own saline. I did just purchase mine because it was easier. Honestly, it was just easier. But saline is just salt and water, so you can make your own, but unless you are comfortable doing that, I would just buy it because it's fine to just buy it. So the thing with nebulizing rats is they don't understand what's going on. So you usually can't just hold the mouthpiece up to their face and have them sit still because they don't understand what's happening. So you typically have to make some kind of nebulizing box or chamber. I use a tea pitcher because that's what my vet recommended, where I just cut a hole in the side to put the mouthpiece in, and then the top of the lid has those like openings so that it helped the vapor escape, because you need it to be able to escape, because otherwise it gets very dense and very heavy in there and it's harder for them to breathe. You also want a cool mist nebulizer if you do get one, because the warm mist, it's a lot harder for their bodies to handle. Rats in general do better in colder temperatures rather than warmer temperatures. So you want cool mist, and if you do end up needing some kind of box, I went with a tea pitcher. You can go with a storage bin. I've seen people use critter keepers. I've seen some people just take a small cage and wrap it in a towel. There are a lot of options for how to get the medicine or saline into them. Now typically rats do not like this very much, which is where a lot of the discord comes from. Because they don't understand what's going on, the nebulizers are typically very loud, and they also vibrate. So a lot of times rats just get freaked out. So I typically, when I would nebulize Warren or Hex, and I had to put them in the tea pitcher, I'd put the nebulizer on the floor if I could, because it muffled a lot of that sound and the vibrations, and I'd have them up on a table away from it, which really helped calm them down because they were further from it and it wasn't as loud. But the thing with both Warren and Hex is that they were very comfortable with me. My rats in general see me as a comfort, so I actually just oftentimes would hold them with one hand and have the nebulizer steam hitting them in the face while they were on my chest. And they were pretty cool with that most of the time. It was only when they were in really bad shape that I would put them in the tea pitcher because they were just too uncomfortable to sit still for very long. But if you have a similar relationship with your rats, you could try that. They might just let you do it. Typically they don't, but maybe they will. Now for me personally, with Hex and Warren, the reason I was trying the nebulizer is because they both had lung congestion. So this brings us to the discourse, is because the stress of having to put the rat in a box with a loud machine next to them, people are worried that it'll make the condition worse, because the stress lowers the immune system. It can allow whatever infection you're trying to stop to spread further and make things a lot worse for the rat. So typically the argument is if it's just going to make it worse, you should only do it as a last resort. And if you get to that point, you should be considering the rat's quality of life to begin with. I disagree with this in some regards. I do think the stress is bad for the rats, but I have seen, as I said, I have a nebulizer, and it can break up the mucus in their lungs a lot. And some vets recommend it. And you know, I think that there's a happy medium with listening to vets when it comes to rats. I think you should do your own research, you should make your own decisions, and then take vet advice, because a lot of times they just don't really understand rats as an animal unless they have personally owned rats as a pet. So I do think that there is a place for nebulizing, because I have seen like it have great effect on specifically Warren. It helped Hex a little bit, but with Warren it really would break down that mucus in her lungs, and she would have several days of just being completely fine without even making a peep. And then the thing with the quality of life is, again, you know your rat best. If you feel like their quality of life is suffering, then take them in. I'm not going to make decisions for your rat because I don't know them. I don't live with them. But for my personal rats, if they get to a point where their quality of life is terrible and I don't think they're going to come back, yes, I will take them in. If I think that there is a treatment that can help them, I will try it, and I'll try to give it a fair shake, just because I do value my rats' lives, but I value their quality of life as well. I'm not going to keep trying when it's not going to work. But I will try if there is in my brain at least a pretty good chance of it working. So that's my stance. If you feel differently, that is absolutely fine. You just have to decide for yourself what you feel is worth trying for your own personal rats. Because I do see some people who will try literally everything. They will go to the greatest lengths way past what I think is reasonable. And that's fine. That's fine for them to do because it's their rats. I may not agree with it, but they're not my pets. So now the stress is a very real factor, and I do think that needs to be considered, because again, it can lower the immune system, and if they're stressed enough that it's lowering their immune system, you're not really helping much. For me, it's not something I do willy-nilly. I only did it for Hex and Warren, and I did it once for Honey to see if it would help with her respiratory issues. What I thought was respiratory issues at the time anyway. I was pretty sure it was heart failure, but I wanted to try the nebulizer just to see if it helped her, and it did not. And for Honey, it was heart issues. Now, with Hex and Warren, I did see great improvement with the nebulizer at first. You can't just nebulize with saline. You need to have some kind of antibiotic as well. And sometimes that can be used with the nebulizer, which I'll get to in a second. But typically, if you're going to be fighting an infection, you need to nebulize to break up the mucus, but you also need antibiotics to help kill the bacteria that is causing the issues to begin with. Now, if your rat is having a lot of trouble taking medication, you can get liquid forms of medication to put in the nebulizer. Sometimes. It depends on what you're going with. So sometimes you can get like albuterol, which is a bronchodilator, or you can get Enro that's in liquid form, and you can nebulize with Enro, and that can help. They breathe it in, and if they just will not take it by mouth, you can do it like that, and then they just breathe it in and it goes straight into the lungs, and it can help. Now that's a pretty serious infection and like treatment plan for them, because it's just a lot for them to deal with. It is 15 minutes of nebulization like twice a day, very high stress. That for me is absolutely a last resort, and again, only if I think it has a good chance of working. But typically, if my rats will not take their medication, even if I try to syringe them and they won't take it, then for me that is a quality of life call, because if I can't get the medicine into them, then I can't save them. Now, one thing I see is some people do choose to nebulize for the sniffles. Like if their rat makes any respiratory noise whatsoever, they do a nebulization. For me, that's a bit extreme. Sometimes rats just sniffle. So it's like, have you ever like cleaned out a closet or something, kicked up a bunch of dust, and then had a stuffy nose? Well, your rats can have that pretty much anytime you change their litter or their bedding, just because you are kicking up all the like dust and debris in their cage as you're moving stuff around. And they're in the same room with it, so anything that's in your room is in their space as well. So sometimes rats just make a little bit of noise. I typically try to give it like 36 hours to see if it clears up on its own before I do anything, because most of the time it does actually clear up on its own. And I know that kind of goes against what a lot of people say, which is if you hear any noise, you need to take them to the vet immediately. But I've had rats a long time. I can typically tell when it's something that needs medication and when it's something that needs to just settle on its own. Like Lamb, for example, is very sensitive, so she gets a goopy eye if basically anything in our cage is changed, and if it has a strong scent to it, goopy eye. So with Lamb, I usually wait a full cage clean to see if it takes care of itself before I worry about it, and it typically does. So know your rats, and yeah, take them to the vet if you're unsure. Definitely take them to the vet if you're unsure. But again, I do typically give them like 36 hours or so to kind of clear it up on themselves, because it usually does clear up on its own. And I understand the reason people do the nebulizations, because it's a fairly safe at-home treatment, because all you need is saline and a nebulizer. But again, the stress of putting them through a nebulization, like some rats are going to handle it better than other rats. But I just feel like it's not necessary, and it could do more damage than good at that point. Especially because it's like a lot of humidity going into their lungs, and that can also make things worse. So, hey Jun. Thank you, Jun. I typically think it's just not really worth it. I don't think the stress is worth it for them, even if it's only like one nebulization for 15 minutes. I've only ever done it if I genuinely thought there was like mucus that needed to be broken down. And very rarely would I do it for an upper respiratory infection. I'd only do it if it got down into their lungs, personally. I do think nebulizers are a good thing to have on hand as like for home remedies and stuff, especially since sometimes your vet may require it for like heavier treatments for respiratory issues. I've had vets tell me that they do think certain rats of mine would have needed nebulization. So it's like Barber, for example, he had a respiratory issue with an underlying heart condition, and the treatment plan would have required nebulizations. So sometimes it is necessary to have one. So I do feel like if you were thinking about getting one, it is worthwhile to have one on hand. And it can help, especially if you're waiting on a vet appointment and you know your rat needs a boost of something. But I don't think it should be taken lightly. I don't think it should be a treatment you just do automatically, because the stress can be a lot for the rat. So yeah, short one this week, but just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Anywho, I hope you liked this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye!